You need to understand something about the desert at 4 in the morning. It does not announce arrivals. It only holds still and waits to see what they're worth. 47 engines idled at the mouth of a residential street where the asphalt had cracked into a map of nowhere, and not one of them revved. That restraint was the whole point. Stay to the end, and you'll understand why silence, that morning, was louder than anything with a throttle. 3 weeks earlier, none of this existed. There was only a Tuesday night shift, fluorescent light, the color of old milk, and a man on a gurney, bleeding through a bar rag someone had pressed to his forearm. She had seen 100 men like him, knuckles scarred into permanent ridges, a jaw that had been reset more than once, a kind of stillness that read less like calm and more like a body that had trained itself not to flinch. His cut was folded on the chair beside him, patches faded from sun and road salt. He didn't look at the wound while she worked. He looked at her hands. She had steady hands. 11 years of practice at not shaking had given her that, though not all of that practice happened in hospitals. She threaded the last suture and taped the gauze with the efficient tenderness of someone who has learned to give care without giving anything else away, and in the 2 seconds his eyes were on the ceiling and not on her, she reached past his boots to the worn leather saddlebag hanging off the back of his jacket, and she pushed something small and gold into the seam of it and closed the flap and never said a word. He didn't feel it. Men like him rarely feel the moment something changes. She had done this without deciding to. That is the part worth sitting with. She did not plan it on the drive-in, did not rehearse it in the mirror of the staff bathroom the way she rehearsed other things, the things she said to explain a bruise, the things she said about being tired, about dropping a pan, about walking into a door frame in the dark of her own kitchen. This was not planned. It was closer to instinct, the last uncalculated thing, left in a life that had become, over 11 careful years, almost entirely calculation. He rode out before sunrise, arms stiff under the bandage, unaware he was carrying something that would not let him rest once he found it. That would not happen for 4 more days. 4 days of a man not checking his own saddlebag. 4 days of her going home to a house where every light switch had a reason attached to it, where the silence had rules she had memorized so well she no longer heard them as silence. But somewhere in that leather, against a rolled length of chain and a spare set of gloves, a wedding band sat with a date engraved on the inside, a date that meant nothing to him yet, and everything to a filing cabinet 3 counties away that no one had opened in a very long time. The bridge back to the beginning starts with a season, because that was how he measured things now, not in months but in the way the air changed against his face at 70 miles an hour. Late August. The kind of heat that sat on the county like a hand pressing down, that turned the blacktop soft at the edges and made the horizon shimmer like something underwater. He had been riding since before dawn that day, not toward anything, just away from a silence in his own house that had gotten too large for one man, and a dog that was getting old. He was not a young man, 53 that summer, though his hands looked older, split-knuckled, sun-spotted, a burn scar climbing the left forearm from a fire that had taken a garage, and, 3 years before that, a marriage he did not discuss. He had learned, the way certain men learn, to carry loss like cargo, strapped down, covered, not looked at directly. The patches on his vest told a version of his life that was mostly true. The parts that were not on the vest, nobody asked about, and he had stopped expecting them to. The bar fight had not been his doing, not really. A younger rider, mouth ahead of his sense, a stranger's fist finding glass instead of a face, and by the time it settled there was blood on the floor, and a laceration along his forearm, deep enough that his brothers had loaded him into a truck bed and driven him 40 minutes to the only ER open past midnight in that stretch of the county. He remembered the fluorescent hum of the room more than the pain. He remembered a woman's hands, steady, unhurried, moving with the particular calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic helped no one, cleaning the wound, threading the needle, working in a silence that he mistook, at the time, for professional distance. He did not know to look for anything else. He did not know that stillness could be its own language, that some people had trained themselves to disappear inside competence the way he had trained himself to disappear inside leather and road noise. He thanked her. She nodded. That was the whole of it, as far as he understood. He did not see her hand pass near the bag slung over the back of the chair where the nurses kept his things while they worked, did not feel the small weight added to it, did not think, riding home into a sunrise the color of a wound, that he was carrying anything more than stitches and a story he'd tell at the clubhouse. 4 days would pass before he opened that bag again. 4 days in which she went home each night to a house that watched her, and he rode roads that asked nothing of him at all. The house sat at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud twice a year, a low ranch with white shutters someone had painted carefully, the kind of careful that comes from wanting to be seen as fine. There was a porch swing that never moved. There was a mailbox with the flag always down, because nothing came to that house that wasn't already expected, already opened, already read by someone other than her. She kept the ring finger bare those 4 days and told herself it was practical, the way she told herself the bruise along her wrist was from a fall against the med cart, the way she told herself a great many things in the particular grammar of a woman who has learned that truth, spoken aloud, costs more than she can afford to pay. He noticed the bare finger. He always noticed. He said nothing that first night, only watched her from the recliner with the sound off on the television, watched the way she moved through the kitchen like someone walking through a room she'd been told was full of glass. On the second night, he asked where it was. She said she'd taken it off to shower and misplaced it, and her voice did not shake, because she had practiced not shaking the way other women practiced piano, hour after hour, until the thing became indistinguishable from instinct. He let it go. That was its own kind of violence, the letting go, a held breath he kept in reserve, to be spent later, on his own schedule, in his own weather. She went to work, she came home. She counted the hours she was not inside that house, the way other people counted money, hoarding them, spending them slow. At the hospital she was competent and warm and unremarkable, the nurse who remembered which children were afraid of needles, and which grandfathers liked to talk about the war, and no one there knew the shape of the thing she carried home each night, folded small enough to fit behind her ribs. 3 counties over, in a garage that smelled of chain oil and cut grass, the bag sat untouched on a shelf for 4 days, while its owner slept off the stitches and the whiskey and whatever else a man carries out of a night like that. He was not a careful man about small things. He was careful about roads, about brothers, about debts owed and paid. The bag was just a bag until the morning he needed the multi-tool inside it and dug past the gauze and the crumpled receipts and felt something round and cold roll against his knuckles, something that did not belong to him, something that caught the garage light and threw it back in a small gold line across the concrete floor. He held it up to the window. He turned it once between 2 fingers thick with scar tissue. Then he saw the engraving on the inside band, small enough that he had to tilt it toward the sun to read the date at all, and something in his chest went still, in a way it hadn't gone still since a different date, a different loss, years before this one. He set the ring on the workbench, next to a coffee can of loose washers, and did not touch it again for a long minute. The date meant nothing to him by itself. Dates rarely did, until they were set against something else, and he had learned that lesson the hard way, in a different decade, staring at a different small object that had also once belonged to someone he could not save in time. He carried it inside instead of leaving it on the bench. His hands still smelled of the garage, oil, rubber, the metal tang of the socket wrench, when he set the ring down on the kitchen table in front of the man who had been riding beside him 19 years. The older man did not pick it up right away either. He only looked at it the way men like that look at things that might matter, which is to say, without hurry, without comment, turning a matchstick between his teeth, while the coffee maker clicked and hissed behind him. That the nurses. It was not a question, and there was no need to answer it as one. The younger man told him what he remembered, which was less than he wanted it to be. The stitches, the steady hands. The way she had not asked him a single question about the fight, had not looked at him the way most people did when they saw the vest and the ink, and decided they already knew the whole story. He remembered her voice, low and even, telling him to hold still. He did not remember her slipping anything into the bag. He had not felt it. That detail sat wrong in him longer than anything else. That a woman could put something so small and so heavy into his hands without his noticing, and that she had chosen to do it in silence. when speaking would have cost her nothing but words. She didn't want it back, the older man said finally, turning the ring so the engraving caught the kitchen light. She wanted somebody to find it. Outside, the wind moved through the yard in long, dry gusts, rattling the chain link and pulling dust across the gravel in thin gold sheets, the kind of late-morning heat that presses down before noon even fully arrives. Neither man spoke for a while. There is a particular quiet that settles over men who have spent their lives being the ones who show up after the damage is already done, and it settled now, heavier than the heat. The younger man reached for his phone. "Somebody's got to know that date," he said. "Somebody's got to know what it goes with." The older man did not answer. He was still holding the ring up to the light, tilting it slowly, the way a man checks a coin for a counterfeit, or checks a wound for the kind of damage that does not show on the surface, the date etched small and deliberate on the inside of the band, waiting, the way certain things wait for years before anyone thinks to ask them what they mean. The younger man's phone lit the kitchen table with a pale blue rectangle, and he set it down without dialing anything, just looking at the date again, mouthing it once like a man testing whether a word tastes the way he remembers it tasting. 6 years back, a spring month, nothing that meant anything to either of them yet. "Could be a birthday," he said. "Could be a wedding. Could be a funeral," the older man said, and did not elaborate. He had learned a long time ago that dates carved into metal were rarely happy accidents. A man did not pay a jeweler to cut numbers into a band unless the numbers were meant to survive longer than the marriage that produced them. He set the ring down on the table between them, on the cracked yellow linoleum, in the small gap of light coming through the kitchen window where the shade did not quite reach, and both men looked at it the way they might look at a spent shell casing found in a field where no one remembered a war being fought. Outside, a truck passed on the 2-lane road beyond the fence, slow and unhurried, the kind of pass-by that belonged to somebody with nowhere in particular to be, and the sound of it faded into the wind before either man thought to look up. "Somebody's got a list," the younger man said. "Somebody always got a list." He meant the club's contacts, the man 2 counties over who still worked dispatch, the woman in records who owed somebody a favor from a decade back, the retired sheriff's deputy who drank alone now but still remembered every case that had crossed his desk before his hands started shaking too badly to hold a coffee cup steady. The brotherhood ran on names like that, quiet debts collected slowly, favors that outlived friendships. The older man nodded once, barely, the kind of nod that cost him nothing and promised everything. He was thinking of the way she had not looked at the biker's face while she worked the needle through his skin. He had noticed that, even through the fog of the anesthetic and the ringing in his ears from the fight, the particular discipline of a person keeping their eyes fixed on a task because the task was the only thing in the room they still had control over. He had thought it was professionalism. Now, turning the ring over again under the window light, he understood it might have been something closer to fear, dressed up in a white coat and steady hands. The younger man picked his phone back up. "I'm calling him," he said. "The one with the badge number he still remembers." Neither of them said her name, because neither of them had it yet, only a date, a ring, and the particular certainty that comes from having spent too many years cleaning up after men who mistook silence for permission. The younger man dialed from memory, a number he had not called in 4 years but had never deleted, and he waited through 3 rings with the phone pressed hard enough against his ear to leave a mark. When the voice answered, it was rougher than he remembered, sanded down by cigarettes and long nights, but it steadied when he said the date and the county. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that meant a man was standing up from his desk, closing a door, lowering his voice even though he was alone. "That case is still open," the voice said. "Barely. Nobody's touched it in 2 years. We might have touched it for you." Another pause, longer this time. Outside the window, the sky had gone the flat white of late morning, the heat already pressing against the glass, and somewhere in the yard a dog was barking at nothing, the sound rising and falling in the dead air like it, too, was waiting for someone to tell it what was true. The voice on the phone asked what they had. The younger man read off the engraving again, slower this time, and added the detail about the hospital, the county line, the particular indifference of a system that filed things and forgot them. He did not mention the biker's face, or the way the older man kept turning the ring over in his palm, like a man rubbing a coin for luck he did not believe in. Some things were not for phones. When the call ended, the room held a different kind of quiet, not the waiting quiet of before, but the quiet of men who have crossed from wondering into knowing, and cannot go back to the comfort of not knowing. The older man set the ring down on the table between them, not in his pocket, not in a drawer, but out in the open, where it caught the light and threw a small pale coin of brightness onto the wood grain. "She didn't ask us for anything," he said. "No. That's usually how you know." The younger man nodded, because he understood what was being said beneath the words, that the ones who asked loud were rarely the ones in real danger, and the ones who slipped something small and heavy into a stranger's bag without a sound were the ones who had learned, the hard way, over years, that asking out loud cost more than it saved. He thought of his own mother once, briefly, then put the thought away where he kept things he did not examine. The dog outside had stopped barking. In its place came the low grumble of an engine turning over in the yard, unhurried, patient, the sound of a man who had made a decision and now only needed the machine beneath him to agree. The engine held its idle for a long moment before the older man rose and went to the window, and outside the yard lay flat and colorless under a sky the color of dishwater, the kind of gray that promised rain and never delivered it, that just sat overhead all day like a held breath. He watched the younger man swing a leg over the seat, watched him settle his weight the way a man settles into a decision he has already made twice in his head before making it once with his body. Neither of them said the word investigation. It would have sounded too clean, too official, for what this actually was. Two men in a kitchen at 9 in the morning, looking at a ring that did not belong to either of them, deciding that the not knowing had become a debt they intended to collect on. The clubhouse phone rang twice before anyone answered it, and when the voice on the other end read off the name attached to the missing persons file, the room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when several men are doing the same arithmetic at once, and none of them like the sum. 3 counties over, 11 years on the file, though the woman herself was, as far as anyone could tell, not missing at all. She went to work, she came home, she signed for packages, she smiled at the mailman. Missing was not always about a body that couldn't be found. Sometimes it was about a person who could be located at any hour of any day and was still, somehow, gone. The older man wrote the county name on the back of a receipt and folded it once, the way he folded things he intended to keep. Outside, the engine had settled into that low, steady thrum that meant the bike was warm and waiting, and the younger man sat on it without moving, hands loose on the grips, eyes on the road that led out of the lot and toward the highway, toward the hospital, where a woman in blue scrubs had, without a single word, made a decision about her own life and handed the evidence of it to a stranger bleeding on a table. He thought about the receipt in his pocket. He thought about the ring on the table, still catching light, still throwing its small pale coin onto the wood. He thought about his mother again, longer this time, and did not put the thought away. By noon there would be 4 more men in the yard. By evening, a dozen. Word moved through the club the way weather moved through open country. You didn't see it coming so much as you felt the pressure change, the air going still before something larger arrived. Nobody had called a meeting. Nobody needed to. The clubhouse yard filled the way a bruise fills, slow, then all at once, dark spreading from a single point until the whole shape of it was visible. He stood at the edge of the gravel and counted without meaning to, an old habit from another life, when counting men in a room had meant the difference between walking out and not. 4 became 7, 7 became 11. The bikes came in low and quiet, none of them gunning their engines for show, because show was not what this was. Each rider dismounted the same way, with the same economy of motion, and each one looked first at the table by the door before he looked at anyone's face. The ring sat where it had been left, and someone had set a folded shop rag beneath it, not to hide it, but the way a man puts a coaster under a glass without thinking, some old courtesy surfacing on its own. The president came out around 1 in the afternoon, a heavy-set man with a beard gone the color of ash and a limp he'd carried since a highway outside Bakersfield 30 years back, and he stood over the ring for a long moment without touching it. Then he asked, not loudly, who had the engraving. The younger man handed him the receipt. He read the numbers twice. He did not say anything for a while, and in that while, the yard went quieter than it had been, men drifting closer without seeming to move at all, the way birds gather on a wire before weather. Someone finally asked if it matched anything, and the president said he didn't know yet, but he knew someone who could find out, and that this was the kind of finding out that took a phone call and a favor and maybe a drive. By 4 o'clock, a woman named Deb, who ran records for a county 3 hours south, had confirmed what the receipt suggested: a missing persons file, 11 years cold, a date that lined up with the etching inside the band, close enough that it could not be called coincidence. Nobody in the yard said the word abduction. Nobody had to. The wounded man sat on an overturned crate with his stitched arm propped against his knee, saying nothing, watching the others the way a man watches weather he has already decided he will ride through. The sun dropped low and orange over the ridge, throwing long shadows across the gravel, and the president looked once more at the ring before closing his fist around it, gently, the way you'd close your hand around something alive. "Tomorrow," he said. "We go tomorrow." Nobody argued. Nobody asked what go meant yet, though every man there had already begun, quietly, to imagine it. The evening didn't end there. It thinned out, the way heat thins after a fire's been banked, and the men drifted in twos and threes toward the clubhouse, where the light came on yellow and steady behind the screen door. The wounded man stayed on the crate a long while, alone, working his jaw the way men do when they're chewing on something that isn't food. His arm throbbed under the stitches, a dull, pulsing reminder of hands that had been gentle with him for exactly as long as it took to hide something in his saddlebag. He kept turning that fact over. A woman who had every reason to ask for help out loud, and instead had folded her fear into a ring and pressed it into leather like a seed into soil, trusting it might grow into something she couldn't grow herself. Inside, the president had already made 2 more calls. One to a lawyer he'd known since a DUI 30 years back, a woman with a sharp mouth and a soft spot for lost causes, who listened to the dates and the county name and went quiet in a way that told him she understood exactly what kind of quiet they were dealing with. The second call was shorter, a deputy, off the record, who owed him from a winter neither of them talked about, who said only, "Give me the plate and the address. I'll look, but I look careful." The clubhouse smelled of coffee gone bitter on the burner, and gun oil, and the particular mustiness of old couches that had absorbed 40 years of men's grief without complaint. A map got spread on the pool table, corners held down by a coffee can, a lighter, someone's boot. Nobody drew battle lines on it. They marked a hospital, a house 3 counties over, a diner where, Deb had said, the wife sometimes stopped for coffee on the mornings she was allowed to drive alone, which, according to the file, wasn't often. The wounded man came in near 10, his arm bound tight against his chest, and stood at the edge of the lamplight looking at the map like it might rearrange itself into something less true. He thought of her hands, steady over his skin, needle passing in and out with a patience that had nothing performative in it. He thought of how she hadn't looked at him when she palmed the ring into the bag. Not shy, not sly, just careful, the way you're careful with something you can't afford to drop. Someone asked him what he wanted to do. He didn't answer right away. Outside, engines were already being checked in the dark. Oil levels, chains, tire pressure, the quiet liturgy men perform before a ride that matters. He looked up finally and said the only thing that felt true. "I want to give it back to her, in person, on her porch, in the daylight, so she knows we're not the kind that hides." No one argued with him. That was the thing about the room that night. Not agreement exactly, more the absence of any reason to disagree. The old one with the gray beard and the busted knuckles nodded once, the way a man nods when a decision matches something he already believed but hadn't said out loud. He put his hand flat on the map, over the diner, over the 3 counties, over the whole quiet distance between what they knew and what they were about to walk into. "Daylight," he said. "Porch. No knocking on doors after dark like we've got something to be ashamed of." The lawyer, when they called her, a woman 2 of them had known since she was still cutting her teeth on custody cases in a courthouse that smelled like mildew and burnt coffee, Didn't ask why 40-some men wanted to hand a stranger a folder of paperwork at sunrise. She asked what kind of paperwork, and when they told her what the hospital records showed, the pattern of visits, the pattern of bruises explained away with the same 3 excuses rotated like a shift schedule, she went quiet in a way that told them she'd seen the pattern before, in other files, other counties, other women who'd learned to drive carefully, and speak carefully, and disappear carefully inside their own lives. "Give me 2 days," she said. "I want the order filed before anyone's boots hit her street." 2 days. It felt like nothing, and it felt like forever, the way waiting does when the waiting has a shape to it, a countdown instead of a fog. He spent the first day with his arm in the sling, doing the small useless chores of a man who needs his hands busy, wiping down a bike that didn't need wiping, checking a chain that had already been checked. He spent the second day at the clubhouse table with the file open in front of him, reading the numbers again, the withdrawals timed to his shifts he didn't know about, the insurance changes filed without her name on the paperwork anymore, the slow arithmetic of a man erasing his wife one signature at a time. He thought about the ring sitting in the bag on the shelf above his bunk, small and bright and patient, and about how it hadn't been given to him so much as entrusted, the way you hand something breakable to whoever's hands look steadiest at the moment you can't hold it anymore. On the morning of the 3rd day, before the light had fully come up gray over the ridge, the lot outside the clubhouse filled with the low idle of engines being warmed against the cold, 47 of them counted twice by habit, exhaust ghosting up into air that still smelled like last night's rain. He swung his good arm over the tank, careful of the stitches, and looked down the line of them stretching back into the dark. "Let's go give a woman back what's hers," he said, and the line moved. The highway ran flat and pale between fields still holding the night's frost in their furrows, and the column moved through it like something the land had been waiting to produce. Chrome catching the first weak sun, leather creaking, the sound of it less like thunder than like a held breath being let out slow. He rode at the front with his stitched arm braced against the vibration of the engine, and he did not think about pain because there was no room for it, the way there hadn't been room for it the night 3 counties over, when a man half his age had swung first and he'd simply absorbed it, waiting his turn. Behind him the line stretched back nearly a quarter mile, and he'd counted them again at the gas station 40 minutes out. 47, the same number as always, the number that meant no one had peeled off for coffee or a smoke, that everyone understood what this morning was for. A few of the younger ones had asked questions the day before, careful, respectful questions about what they were riding into, whether there'd be trouble, whether the husband would be waiting on the porch with something in his hand. He'd told them the truth, which was that he didn't know, and that it didn't matter, because they weren't going to give the man a reason. The lawyer had followed 2 cars back the whole way, a woman in her 50s with a briefcase belted into the passenger seat like a second person, and behind her, the 2 deputies in an unmarked sedan, off-duty, doing this on their own time, because one of them had a sister who'd lived a version of the same story and hadn't made it out until the marriage had. He'd met them both at the diner the evening before, low voices over black coffee, going over what could and couldn't be said, what the folder would contain, what would happen if the man tried to call it something other than what it was. The sun came up fully somewhere past the county line, burning off the last of the frost, and the road narrowed into the kind of 2-lane stretch that ran past leaning fences and one gas station with half its letters dead, and he felt the particular stillness that comes before a thing you've prepared for finally arrives. Not fear exactly, but its careful cousin, attention sharpened down to a fine point. He thought of her hands the night she'd sewn nothing at all into his arm, but had reached past the wound to leave something behind instead, small and deliberate, the way a person plants something in soil they won't be alive to see bloom. He hadn't earned that trust. He only intended to be worthy of having received it. The town sign came up on the right, sun-bleached, bullet-pocked at one corner, and he read the name of the place that had been holding her for 11 years and did not slow down. The clubhouse lot had emptied like a held breath finally let out, 46 bikes falling in behind his, in a loose river of chrome and black leather, engines low and even, no one gunning a throttle, no one showing off for a stretch of road that didn't deserve the noise. He watched them in his mirrors, a line stretching back farther than he could count without looking twice. Men who had left warm beds and cold coffee, and wives who'd stopped asking questions years ago, all of them riding toward a house they'd never seen, for a woman most of them had never spoken to. That was the thing about the patch, he thought. It didn't ask you to understand. It only asked you to show up. The county road split near an irrigation ditch gone dry and brown, cattails leaning like old men, and he took the turn slow, gravel spitting soft under the tires, and somewhere behind him he heard the whole column downshift in a ripple, obedient, unhurried. A hawk sat on a fence post watching them pass with the flat disinterest of something that had seen worse pass this way before. He thought about the folder writing in his saddlebag, thin as a church bulletin, and how something that light could carry the weight it did. Bank statements photocopied twice for safety, a printout of a protective order with her name typed clean and official, where for 11 years it had only ever been spoken in someone else's mouth, and beneath all of it, wrapped in a square of paper towel because he hadn't known what else to use, the ring. He had turned it over more than once in the weeks it took to get here. Read the date engraved inside the band until he'd learned it the way a man learns a scar on his own hand, without meaning to, just from looking too often. He didn't know yet what he would say when he handed it back, or if he'd need to say anything at all. He suspected not. Some things only needed to be present. The lawyer's sedan idled at the crossroads where they'd agreed to meet, dust settling gray on its hood, and the two deputies stood beside it in plain clothes, arms crossed, faces unreadable in the way of men who had decided already which uniform mattered more that morning. He raised two fingers off the handlebar as he passed, and they nodded and fell in at the rear of the column like a period at the end of a sentence that hadn't been spoken yet. Ahead, the road bent one more time before her street, and past that bend the light was doing something to the rooftops, gold and thin, the kind of light that made a place look almost forgiven. He did not slow down for that either. The bend gave way to her street the way a held breath gives way to air, all at once, and nothing changed by the release of it. Modest houses, chain-link fences with morning glory choking the diamonds, a dog somewhere behind a screen door, barking twice and then losing interest. He had pictured it different, though he couldn't have said what different would have looked like. Something meaner, maybe, something that announced itself. Instead, there was a mailbox shaped like a barn, faded red, the flag broken off at the hinge. Instead, there was a lawn somebody mowed in stripes, out of habit or pride or fear, hard to say which from the outside. He cut the engine at the corner and let the others fill in behind him, one by one, the sound dying down the line like a held note released string by string, until the street held nothing but the tick of cooling metal and the small domestic noises of a town waking up around a silence it didn't know was there. 46 machines behind his own. He'd counted them without meaning to, the way he'd counted the date inside the ring. No one spoke. That had been decided days ago, in the clubhouse, over a table covered in maps and phone records, and a folder growing thick with things a court would want to see. Say nothing unless she says something first. Stand where she can see you and know where she can't. The house sat third from the corner, pale blue with white trim, gone the color of old teeth. Curtains drawn behind glass that hadn't been washed in a season. A truck in the driveway, newer than the house, washed that week. He noted it the way he noted everything now, filing it without judgment. A man could keep his truck clean, and his hands filthy. He'd known plenty who did. The lawyer's sedan pulled to the curb and stopped, and the two deputies got out slow, unhurried, the folder passing from the lawyer's hand to the taller ones without a word exchanged, choreography rehearsed enough to look unrehearsed. They walked toward the porch. He stayed on the bike. That had been decided too, that his part of this was presence, not proximity, that a woman deciding to leave a man didn't need 47 strangers crowding her doorway, only knowing they were there. The house held still a moment longer. Then a light went on behind the curtains, small and yellow, and somewhere inside it a shape moved past the window, slow, unhurried, someone who had learned long ago that hurrying only ever cost her more than it saved. He watched the curtain and did not touch the ring in his pocket, though his hand wanted to. Not yet. This part wasn't his to start. The taller deputy knocked twice, a spacing to it that felt learned, not casual. 3 seconds, maybe 4, enough for a person inside to cross a room without panic. He counted it without meaning to. Old habit. In another life he'd counted seconds before doors opened too, though for reasons that had nothing to do with mercy. The door came open on a chain first, the way doors in that house always seemed to, then wider when she saw the folder, then wider still when she saw who was holding it and who was standing a little behind, badge clipped where it could be seen and nowhere else. She was in a robe over scrubs, hair still flattened from a shift that hadn't ended so much as been interrupted by a knock she must have been waiting on without knowing it. Her feet were bare on the porch boards. He noticed that before anything else. A woman who had learned to move through a house without sound, who had trained her own footsteps into silence the way some men trained their fists. She didn't ask who sent them. That told him something too, that she had rehearsed for this in her head, longer than anyone had rehearsed it on the curb. The lawyer spoke low, words he couldn't catch from where he sat, and she took the folder the way a person takes something they've been told for years they weren't allowed to want, both hands, careful, as if it might be pulled back. A curtain shifted in the front window, and this time it wasn't her shape behind it. It was his, bigger, stiller, arms crossed in the posture of a man, watching something he could not yet name a threat, but already resented on principle. He didn't come to the door. That was its own kind of information. A man who ruled a house by staying inside it, never by stepping out to meet what challenged him. The deputies didn't look at the window. That, too, had been decided in advance. Back at the diner table over coffee that had gone cold twice. No eye contact with him. No acknowledgement that gave him a stage. The morning belonged to her. She read something on the top page, and her mouth went thin and pale, the particular stillness of a person absorbing a number she'd suspected but never seen printed. 11 years of accounts. 11 years reduced to lines and figures a stranger could read in under a minute. Then she looked past the lawyer, past the deputies, down the street to where the leather and chrome stood in their long, unmoving row, engines silent, exhaust long since cooled, 47 men who had not said a word to her and did not intend to. She looked the longest at nothing in particular, at the row itself, at the fact of it. He kept his eyes forward, hands loose on the grips, and let her look as long as she needed. The lawyer waited. He had done this before, though never quite like this, never with an audience of 47 men standing sentinel instead of hiding in the wings. And he understood, the way careful men understand weather, that his job right now was to say nothing extra. He let the silence hold. Somewhere behind the house a dog barked twice and stopped, and a screen door 2 lots down opened for a curious neighbor and closed again just as fast, the neighborhood absorbing the strangeness of the morning the way small towns absorb everything, quietly and for later conversation. She turned the page. Her hands were steady in a way that seemed to cost her something, the steadiness of a person who has trained herself for years not to shake in front of anyone. On the second page were the transfers, the ones routed through an account she hadn't known existed, opened the same month she'd stopped working nights the first time, the month he'd told her the schedule wasn't safe for a woman alone on the roads after midnight. She had believed him. She read the account number twice, as if reading it a third time might make it belong to someone else. "That one's real," the lawyer said. "Not gently, just true. Filed with the bank under both names. You're entitled to half of everything in it, going back to when it opened." She didn't answer. Her eyes went again to the house, to the window, to the shape that had not moved from behind the glass, and something in her jaw tightened the way a rope tightens right before it either holds or gives. He watched her from the truck, both hands still loose on the wheel, and thought about the difference between a man who steps outside to meet a threat and a man who stays behind glass and lets his silence do his fighting for him. He had spent 30 years around men of the first kind, men who solved things badly and loudly, and had never once, in all that time, feared them the way he feared. Just now, on her behalf, a man who would not come to the door. One of the deputies shifted his weight, boots creaking on the gravel, the small sound loud in the stillness. Down the row, a bike's kickstand ticked once as metal cooled unevenly in the rising heat, and nobody moved to check it. 47 engines had gone quiet almost 40 minutes ago, and stayed that way. and the quiet had become its own kind of proof that this wasn't a raid, wasn't a threat, was only presence, offered and held. She closed the folder. She did not close it like a woman finished. She closed it like a woman deciding, gathering the last of it into her hands, and for the first time since she'd stepped onto the porch, she looked directly at the row of leather and chrome, instead of past it, searching the faces for the one she already knew, the one that had not spoken a single word to her yet. He was standing at the far end of the line, closer to the mailbox than to the others, as if he had chosen that distance on purpose and not by accident. He had not crossed his arms. He had not put his hands in his pockets the way the others had, that particular posture men take when they are trying to look like they are not watching something too closely. His hands hung open at his sides, scarred across the knuckles in the old, pale way that comes from a lifetime of small mistakes, with tools and glass and other men's teeth, and he kept them that way, visible, as if to say there was nothing in them and never would be. She walked toward him without deciding to. Her feet moved before the rest of her caught up, scrubs still creased from the shift she hadn't changed out of, the hospital badge still clipped crooked to her collar, and the gravel found every soft place in her shoes, and she did not stop to feel it. The deputies did not follow. The lawyer did not follow. Even the row of bikes seemed to lean back, if machines could lean, giving her the width of the driveway like a held breath. He watched her come the way a man watches weather arrive, not with alarm, but with the stillness of someone who has learned that movement too soon spoils everything. "You didn't have to send all this," she said, and lifted the folder an inch. Not an accusation, just a fact she wanted spoken aloud between them. "No," he said. "Wanted to." The wind picked up dust along the fence line, and somewhere behind the house a dog she recognized barked twice and stopped, and she thought, distantly, that even the dog had learned when barking cost more than it was worth. "He's not going to come out," she said. "Don't need him to." She looked past his shoulder at the line of men who had not spoken to her, who had not needed to, whose engines had been silent for the better part of an hour in the flat white heat of a morning that had not yet decided how hot it meant to become, and she understood, in the specific way that only comes after years of understanding the opposite, that presence and threat were not the same instrument, that a wall could be built entirely out of stillness. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say to 47 people," she said. "Don't say anything," he said. "Get in the truck." She looked down at the folder in her hands, at the motel key taped to its corner, at her own name typed clean and official across the top of a form that had, for 11 years, never once had her name on anything that mattered. And when she looked up again, his eyes were not on her face but on her hands, watching them the way a man watches to see if someone is about to drop something breakable. Her hands did not drop anything. They closed around the folder the way hands close around something that has just been handed back after being taken for a very long time, not tightly, not with the white-knuckled grip of fear, but with the deliberate care of someone relearning the weight of her own possessions. He noticed this and said nothing about it, because there are moments a man understands are not his to narrate. The screen door of the house did not open. A curtain in the front window moved once, the kind of movement that could have been wind if there had been any wind that morning, and then went still, and no one on the street commented on it, and no one needed to. 46 other men sat their machines in a line that ran from the mailbox to the end of the block, not looking at the house, not looking at her, looking instead at the middle distance, the way men who have stood guard duty learn to look, at nothing and everything, at the whole street as a single object to be watched. She walked toward the truck in her scrubs, and the fabric was still faintly damp at the collar from the night shift she had not slept off, and the flat white light caught the plastic hospital badge still clipped to her breast pocket, her own photograph looking back up at anyone who cared to look, her own name printed beneath it in a font no one had ever needed her permission to use. She stopped once, halfway across the yard, and turned back toward the house, not toward the door, but toward the window above the porch, the one that had been hers for 11 years and had never once, that she could remember, been opened from the inside. "He'll say I stole something," she said. "He'll say I took the truck, took the account, took—" She stopped herself before the next word. the one that would have named a person rather than an object, and looked instead at the folder in her hands, as if it could answer for her. "Let him say it to the lawyer," the deputy said from behind her, not unkindly, the tone of a man reciting a fact rather than making a promise. "Say it to somebody whose job it is to listen." She nodded. Once, the way people nod when they are agreeing with a sentence rather than believing it yet, and she climbed into the truck, and the door made a sound when it shut that was ordinary and mechanical and, to her, apparently enormous, because she flinched at it, and then caught herself flinching, and looked out through the windshield at the line of leather and chrome parked like a fence between herself and everything she was leaving. The engines came alive one at a time, not all together, a slow rolling thunder moving down the block from the mailbox toward the truck, patient, unhurried, the sound of something that had all the time in the world now that it had finally started. The truck pulled away from the curb at a speed that felt almost insulting after 11 years of everything happening too fast to track, and she watched the house recede in the side mirror, the porch light still burning yellow against the gray morning, the curtains in the front window not moving, no shape behind the glass, and she understood that she had expected some final confrontation, some scene, and that its absence felt like a theft of its own, a debt that would go uncollected. The line of motorcycles fell in behind the truck in no particular order, not an escort so much as a slow migration, and she turned once in her seat to look at them, and then made herself stop, because looking back had a gravity to it she did not entirely trust yet. The lawyer rode in the truck's back seat, the folder now closed on her lap, and she spoke without being asked. "The order's filed. He'll be served today. You don't have to be there for that." She said it the way a person reads out a schedule, no comfort attached to it, and it landed better for the lack. The nurse said nothing for a while, watching the county go by in its early light, the water tower, the feed store with its hand-painted sign, the diner, where she had eaten breakfast alone more mornings than she could count, all of it ordinary, and none of it hers anymore, in the way it had been an hour before. "The motel," she said finally, testing the word. "2 nights paid," the lawyer said. "After that, we'll have somewhere better." She did not ask what better meant. She had learned, somewhere in the last decade, not to ask questions whose answers she would have to hold before she was ready, and this was a habit that would take longer to unlearn than the marriage had taken to build. The biker driving kept his eyes on the road and said only one thing the whole way, low, almost to himself. "Bad parts behind you now." She did not answer him, but she reached up without deciding to, and touched the base of her finger where the ring had been for 11 years, the skin there paler than the rest of her hand, a stripe of absence shaped exactly like a life, and she left her hand there a moment longer than she needed to, as though checking that the emptiness was real and not something she had imagined out of wanting it too badly. Behind them, the line of engines held their pace, patient as a procession, and none of them sounded like they intended to turn back. The motel sat at the edge of a county she had never had a reason to visit, a single-story row of doors facing a parking lot cracked into a map of nowhere, and the woman at the desk did not ask why a nurse in wrinkled scrubs was checking in at 7 in the morning with a lawyer standing 3 feet behind her, like a shadow that had learned to wear a blazer. The key was a real key, brass and heavy, not a card, and she held it the way she might have held a stone pulled up warm from a riverbed, something with weight enough to prove it existed. Inside, the room smelled of bleach and old carpet, and the particular stillness of places built for people passing through. She sat on the edge of the bed without taking off her shoes. Outside, she could hear the engines finally cutting off one by one, the sound dying down the row, like something being lowered gently into water, until the morning held nothing but birds, and the distant highway, and her own breathing, which she noticed, for the first time in longer than she could name, she was not holding. The lawyer knocked once, came in only far enough to set the folder on the small table by the window. "Everything's dated," he said. "Everything's signed. If he calls, if he comes by, you don't have to say anything to him ever again. That's not a suggestion. That's the order." She nodded at the folder rather than at him, as though the papers themselves were the ones she needed to address. When he left, she was alone for the first time since the hospital corridor, and the aloneness did not feel like the aloneness of the last 11 years, which had always had a shape pressing against it from outside. This was different. This had edges she could touch. She went to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The line of motorcycles still sat along the curb outside the motel, unmoving, chrome dulled under a sky the color of skim milk, and a few of the riders stood near them, not looking at her door, not looking at anything in particular, the way men stand guard when they don't want the guarding to be noticed. She let the curtain fall back into place. On the table, beside the folder, someone had left a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm and a granola bar still in its wrapper, small gestures that asked nothing of her, and she found that she was crying before she understood she had started, not from grief exactly, but from the strange, disorienting relief of being handed things instead of having them taken. She ate half the granola bar because her hands needed something to do, and then she sat with the folder open in front of her again, reading it the way a person reads a language they are only now learning to trust. 3 years of bank statements, copies of the deed with her name absent from it, though her wages had gone into the mortgage every month for a decade. A letter from the utility company showing the account had always carried his name only, so that even the lights above her head, all these years, had technically belonged to someone else's permission. She had known this in her body long before she had known it on paper. Seeing it typed out in black ink on white pages did something different to her than knowing it had done. It moved the knowledge from the private, deniable place where he had always kept it, into a place that could be shown to another person, argued in front of a judge, believed by a stranger who had never met her and never would. Outside, the morning widened. The milk-colored sky thinned at its edges and let a little pale gold through, and the sound of the highway 2 blocks over rose the way it always did once the day's first trucks got moving, a sound she associated with shift changes, with the hour when the hospital hallways filled and the machines began their long, unbroken chorus again. She thought of her locker there, 3 counties behind her now, the small mirror taped inside its door, the photograph of no one in particular she had put up years ago because a coworker had asked why her locker was so bare, and she hadn't had an answer she wanted to give out loud. Someone knocked, twice, gently, and did not wait for her to open the door before speaking through it. "Lawyer wants your signature by noon," the voice said. "No rush past that." She looked at the clock on the nightstand, its numbers red and patient, and understood that noon was a kind of shoreline she was being allowed to walk toward at her own pace, instead of being thrown into. She dressed in the clothes someone had brought from a store 2 towns over, still creased from their packaging, the tags cut off and left in a small pile on the dresser like something shed. When she opened the door at last, the light outside was fuller than she expected, and the line of motorcycles along the curb had not moved, had not thinned, as if the night had simply agreed to hold its position a little longer for her sake. She sat at the small table by the window with the folder open in front of her, and the lawyer sat across from her with a pen already uncapped, waiting the way patient men wait, not looking at the clock, not looking at her, looking instead at a spot on the tablecloth as if it required his attention. 11 years condensed into 40 pages, she thought, and did not say it. The bank statements. The transfers out of accounts she had not known existed until 3 weeks ago. The insurance policy with her name spelled wrong on purpose, she suspected, so that a claim would stall in exactly the kind of bureaucratic fog her husband had always been good at generating around her. She read each page slowly, the way she had once read charts at 4 in the morning, looking for the thing that didn't add up, and this time the thing that didn't add up was the sheer volume of it, the years of small, quiet arithmetic that had been done without her, on her, around her. "You don't have to sign all of it today," the lawyer said. "Just the protective order. The rest can wait." She signed the protective order first, her hand steadier than she expected, the pen scratching in the quiet room, with a sound that seemed too small for what it was doing. Then she signed the rest anyway, page after page, because waiting had never once made anything easier in 11 years, and she did not see why it would start now. Outside, through the thin curtain, she could see the shapes of them still parked along the curb, unmoving, patient as fence posts, and every few minutes one of them would shift his weight or say something low to the man beside him, but none of them looked at the motel door. None of them made her feel watched. They simply were there, the way a wall is there, the way she imagined a shoreline must feel to a boat that has been out too long in weather. The biker with the stitched forearm came in near the end, ducking his head under the low frame of the door, and stood by the wall without sitting, as if sitting would have made the moment smaller than it needed to be. He did not ask how she was. He had learned, somewhere between the bar fight and this room, that the question rarely got him anything true. "There's coffee outside," he said instead, "if you want it." She looked at the folder, closed now, her name signed at the bottom of every page in a hand that no longer shook, and she thought that she did, actually, want the coffee, wanted it badly, the way she had not wanted small, ordinary things in a very long time. The coffee was bad, the kind that came from a machine bolted to a wall outside a motel office in a county that had never invested in better, and she drank it anyway, standing at the edge of the lot in her scrubs with the folder tucked under one arm, like something she was afraid to set down. The lawyer had left a card with a number on it and instructions written in plain, unhurried language. Call before the hearing. Call if he tries to contact you. Call for any reason at all, day or night. She had folded the card into the same pocket where she used to keep the ring, an automatic gesture she noticed only after her hand was already there, empty, the pocket lighter than it had been in 11 years. The bikers did not leave right away. They drank their own coffee from a battered percolator someone had produced from a saddlebag, standing in loose clusters that never quite became a crowd, and the morning light came up slow and gold over the flat roofs of the motel, catching on chrome, on the pale scar tissue of forearms, on the gray in beards that had once been dark. One of the younger riders, barely out of his 20s, sat on the tailgate of a truck with a paper plate of eggs from the diner across the road, and when she passed him, he lifted the plate slightly, an offer, wordless. She shook her head, but something in her chest loosened at the gesture, small as it was. The man with the stitched forearm watched her the way he had learned to watch things that might spook, sideways, unhurried, giving her room to move without feeling herded. He did not tell her what came next. He had decided, somewhere in the long drive out from the county line, that he would not be the one to fill her silences with plans, that she had had enough of other people deciding the shape of her days. She finished the coffee. She looked at the line of motorcycles parked along the frontage road, 40-some machines catching the early sun, and beyond them the flat brown distance where the highway ran back toward the house she had left behind hours ago, the porch light probably still burning because no one had thought to turn it off. She did not look toward the house for long. "Where do people go?" she asked, after this. Not a question aimed at anyone in particular. He considered it the way he considered most things, slowly, turning it over before answering. "Depends what they want," he said. "Some people want to disappear. Some people want to be seen doing it." She was quiet a moment, watching the light move across the lot. "I don't know which one I want yet," she said. That was fine, he told her. Both those things were fine. He had known men who needed the first, and women who needed the second, and neither one was owed to anybody but her. She nodded like she was filing the answer away for later, the way she probably filed vitals and dosages on a chart, precise and unhurried, no room in her for waste. Then she asked him something he had not expected, though he should have. "Does the ring still fit you? In the bag?" He said it never fit him at all, that he had carried it the way a man carries a splinter he can't quite reach, aware of it at strange hours, in traffic, at stoplights, never able to leave it alone. She almost smiled at that. It was the first almost smile he had seen on her since the parking lot outside the clubhouse, and it did something to the morning that the coffee and the engines and the flat gold light had not managed on their own. The lawyer came over then, folder tucked under one arm, and said the paperwork was filed, the order was active as of 6:40 that morning, that the county would have a deputy drive past the house twice a shift for the next 2 weeks whether anyone called or not. She listened to all of it with the same stillness she'd shown at the porch steps, taking it in like inventory, like something she would need to recite back to herself in the weeks ahead when the fear returned. Because it would return. He knew that the way he knew weather. One of the younger riders, the one with the split lip still healing from the man's boot, brought her a jacket without being asked, draped it over the tailgate near her hand, and walked off before she could thank him or refuse it. She looked at the jacket a long moment before she put it on. It was too big through the shoulders. She rolled the sleeves twice and did not say anything about it, and somehow the silence around the gesture felt like the truest thing that had happened all morning. The bikes started leaving in twos and threes, engines catching low and rolling off down the frontage road toward the highway, until it was down to a dozen, then six, then his truck, and two others idling behind it. She watched them go the way a person watches weather clear, not quite trusting it yet. "Where to now?" she asked again, and this time there was less fear in it than curiosity, which he understood to be the first small mercy of the day. "Somewhere that isn't here," he told her, and for once that was answer enough. Months moved the way months do when a person finally has room to feel them. Not fast, not slow, just forward. She took the night shift at a hospital 2 counties east, in a town with a different name on the water tower, and no one who knew her by her married name. The rotation suited her. Nights were quiet in the particular way she needed quiet to be, full of purpose, empty of eyes. She learned the corridors by their sounds, the way she once learned a man's moods by the weight of his footsteps in a hallway, and it struck her, some shift past midnight, that she was still reading a room for danger out of habit, and that the habit was slowly going unused. The folder had done what folders do. The order held, the house sold, the paperwork closed something that words alone never could have, and she signed the last of it at a lawyer's table, with a hand that had stopped shaking 3 signatures in. He rode out to see her twice that first year, unannounced both times, the way a man checks a fence line, without needing to be asked. She fed him coffee on a porch that was hers alone to sit on. They did not talk about the morning with the trucks, and the wall of leather down her street. Some things did not need to be gone over again to stay true. The ring came back into it near the end of that year, though not as it had been. She had it cut down, replated, the engraving ground smooth, and a plain band left in its place, and she wore it on her right hand now, where it meant nothing to anyone but her. It caught the light over a suture tray one night, and a younger nurse asked if it was a promise ring, and she said, after a moment, that it was a reminder ring, which was truer and required no further explanation. The town where it started went on being what it had always been, a bar, a highway, a clinic with fluorescent lights that never fully warmed the room. Nobody there remembered the morning of the bikes except as a rumor that thinned with each retelling, the way most true things do in small places. But she remembered it exactly. The silence of 47 engines cut at once, the folder in a stranger's hand, the jacket too big through the shoulders, and on nights when the old fear surfaced, thin and familiar as a draft under a door, she would touch the ring on her right hand and find, each time,